Gospel according to John, the 16th chapter. And Jesus said to his disciples, I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth, for he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears, he will speak, and he will declare to you the things that are to come. He will glorify me, for he will take what is mine and declare it to you. All the Father has is mine. Therefore I said that he will take what is mine and will declare it to you, the word of the Lord. You may be seated. George Martin, the legendary producer of the Beatles, was once asked if there was a magical formula, a magical theme that could be made that produced hit music. And amazingly enough, he said he did actually believe there was a formula to create a hit musical. A verse, a chorus, a verse, repeat the chorus, interlude, and maybe a third verse. Indeed, the wildly successful Marvel movies also have a structure. The 22 films have grossed over $21.3 billion already, and they also follow a particular formula. Almost every single one does. What we notice is that the movie generally follows the similar plot. There's a dilemma with some ancient prophecy or artifact. A hero emerges and utterly fails because he or she is not properly equipped. This person then goes through introspection, eventually fighting battles until the final showdown, which they ultimately win. The same structure can be seen in our gospel today. We still have much to learn, we are told by Jesus at the outset. But the Spirit will be given to us, and then we will be able to change the world. All of this is underlined by one simple word: bearing. The first of these bearings comes from the realization that we say we wish to learn, but Christ tells us we cannot bear what he has to teach us. Now, what does he mean by all of this? I thought being a Christian, some of us may think, I thought being a Christian just meant if I do the right things, if I just follow these right rules, then God will love me. I'll earn my love. But if you've spent any time reading the Bible, you understand that that's not the story that the gospel has. Here in this particular passage, Jesus is laying out a structure that's very important for us to remember. Let's again return to those superhero films. Here, the hero fights a villain who has been able and has been good and working on their craft for a very long time. They don't realize usually that this person is the villain, or maybe the villain's just been off to the side and kept secret their intentions. Befuddled and weak, appearing helpless, the hero fails to even understand the motives of the villain, and they lose, and lose very badly. The hero cannot bear up under the weight of all of these things. The first definition of forbearing is to lift up to a higher level. Leveling up, if you will, and don't worry, the kids will know what I'm talking about. This leveling up that people must do, this growth, is what Christ is promising here at the beginning. But in order to grow, there must be a loss. And this loss is really twofold. Firstly, it falls on all people as we realize that the problems and pain of our lives are never anything that we can bear. This is an uncomfortable truth to people in our very comfortable world. And people who live in comfort often have trouble bearing these things. But people who are honest with the fact that the world is unjust but should be just, that people aren't as caring as they should be, they all realize that the world has an ideal, but that we're not able to live up to that. And the second revelation is this. We accept that Christ will be the one who will be able to bear the burdens that we have. We cannot bear those burdens. We cannot bear all the burdens of injustice and broken relationships in our world. We've tried. We've failed. As one commentator said, if sin were something we were able to figure out as if it were some sort of disease within us, don't you think we would have found a cure for it by now? Sin is around us. The broken relationships are all around us. Time and time again, we hear that people should be living a certain way and that they fall short of living a certain way. And we are constantly trying to figure out some other way to put Band-Aids on the problem. We cannot bear the burden of sin and death that has entered the world, but Christ can. So those are the two things. You cannot bear that burden, but Christ can. All He is asking is that you accept His offer to bear your burden. Accepting our need for a Savior and accepting Christ's gift of bearing the load gives us a new power, the Holy Spirit. So it's not just the fact that you are forgiven and now you're left in just the same mess as you were before. Rather, Christ has promised us here, and this is the second point, He is promising to give us the Holy Spirit. In our day and age, though, we're often very confused about this third member of the Trinity. Aren't I supposed to be the one to make sure that I'm living as a good person? Aren't I supposed to be the person who fixes all the problems? Doesn't the burden of the entire church and its 2,000-year-old history lay on my shoulders? But we believe, rather, that this Holy Spirit is something else entirely. It's not some sort of new insight. It's always good to have Bibles with a lot of papers in them. We believe that this Holy Spirit is not some sort of new insight. We believe that the Holy Spirit is not some new set of rules, but rather is God who has been dwelling in the presence of God, living inside of our hearts, acting out, fulfilling all of His plans. We believe He is a power that tells us how to do good, people think out there, though. We've reduced Him down to these things. And the second thing that we hear far too often out there is we may even believe He gives us superpowers for healing or speaking heavenly languages. Though these things are not outside His abilities to accomplish, that is not what we are promised here. Rather, we are promised far more than we can imagine. You see, for many of us, we believe that the gift of the Holy Spirit will help us actualize our desires, help us put our plans into motion, that God somehow or other needs us to fulfill His goal for saving the world. But rather, what the Holy Spirit is and what Christ is telling us here, read it again. We can't bear this. Why? Because we're trying to effect a change against the great enemies of life, sin and death, by our own power. Sin and death have had far too much time to hone their abilities to be defeated by a human being. But when God dwells within us, then what will happen is God will then share this plan, this redemption story, if you will, to all of us. For in all the superhero movies, there is one thing the hero cannot do, and that's know how the story is going to end. Yet here, in this passage, we hear something different. A power unimaginable. Christ telling people that in the end, we have access to the creator of this story. And that in the end, everything will turn out all right for those who put their trust in him. You see, knowledge isn't about getting answers for the questions we want to ask. But rather, knowledge is listening. Wisdom is listening to the story God is trying to tell us. At the beginning of this passage, notice Christ tells us there's much he wants to tell us, but he can't. Only the Spirit will be able to tell us these things. After we have laid our hopes and our fears down at the foot of the cross, the Spirit will come to us, and we will be open to hearing how this story is going to end. The final point is this. We are told that this Spirit, who gained his power by being in the glory of the Father, will glorify the Son. But we wonder how. Simple. The glory of God will be seen in the people whom the Son has received. The glory of God will be seen in his church. Many of us hope to see miracles. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with miracles. But the thing to remember about miracles is they are often a last resort after everything else has fallen short. You don't want to take your car to the mechanic, as it were. You'd rather your car work just fine. And the same thing's true with miracles. It's God's intervention into a world that is far from. The miracle stories we see, we read, don't happen in places where people are being incredibly obedient to God. Rather, they happen in the places where God needs to show his wonders, to change people's lives, indeed to effect change in all of creation. So the glory of God is seen in something more miraculous than miracles themselves. It's seen in the daily lives of a church that cares for its neighbor and gratefully thanks God for all the blessings he's given them. This glorious power is not something we earn because we are so much better than everyone else, but something we accept because we are being given it by the only one who is perfect. Christ reminds us that in our journey with God, we still have much to learn, but that this promised Spirit lives inside all believers so that God's knowledge and forgiveness dwells within us. When this happens, we feel compelled not to lock up the Holy Spirit within ourselves, but to share that glory to a world that desperately needs to see glory and to hear rumors of glory. We should be aware that in life, the simple answers and formulas are often correct. There's a reason why we hear echoes of this salvation story in the stories we tell, because it's a story we most desperately want to hear. It's a story we desperately want to share with our neighbors. Just as in music and cinema, life has a simple problem: sin, death, disunion, broken relationships, all the same thing. But it also has a very simple solution. God's promise to bear our burdens. Amen.